All right. Hello, wonderful women of the world. Wow. We've got so many countries with us. We've got the US, Canada, UK, Spain, Norway, Denmark. Did I miss any? No, maybe I got them all there. That's good. So far that's what we've got on the call, which is amazing. So I love it. So this is called Visionary Women. Reinvigorating, reimagining, and reinventing the world. I had to look at my notes because that's a mouthful to try to remember. So, I'm Slara Green, for any of you who haven't met me before. So I call myself a future innovator and a consciousness innovator and an alchemist. And I do all kinds of wonderful things. And I've written 18, 19 books. But I'm passionate about making the world a better, brighter, more awesome, and super evolved place. That's my that's my work. It's been my work for about the past 28 years, I would say. Well, at least the last 24 for sure, since the early 2000s, I would say. That's been my work, and that's what I'm about. So, and it was interesting because Kelly and Denise and I went out to lunch, and I was saying, so when did you know you wanted to make the world a better place? And Kelly said, always. And Denise said, last year. And I thought that was really so interesting how it's kind of coming upon all of us so differently, that we want to elevate the world in some way or evolve the world, whatever terms you want to use for it, that we want to make it brighter and better and more awesome all the time. And well, would say when I first started, felt like a daunting thing. What? If you'd took me back 30 years, I would have been like, you kidding? Like, what can one person do? And now I'm like, this, and this, and this, and this, and this. So, and I'm seeing that more and more with people all around me. So, that's me. I think I started wanting to make the world brighter and better probably in the mid 1990s, definitely by the late 1990s and into early 2000s. And that's what I've been about ever since. And so I'll talk a little bit in a while about one or two of the ways I've been doing that. But I thought I'd introduce the co-hosts or let them introduce themselves. So Judy, how about if we start with you and say where you're from and give us a bit of overview?
Hi, I am currently living just outside of Halifax in Nova Scotia, Canada, and it is a rather warm, rainy day today. I think, in some of the conversations we were having earlier, I've always known. I know from my mother, especially when I was younger, I would see people interacting and say, that's not how we're supposed to interact. Or I can remember when the Bear aspirin commercial first came out and you haven't got time for the pain. And it really upset me and my mother asked me why. And I said, because that means people aren't listening to their bodies. If they don't have your bodies, we're so interconnected. And so I can remember being in another room and hearing my mother talk to a friend to say, how do I work with this child? And I think I know a bigger piece is always working energetically to overcome our environment because I believe right now we exist in consciousness in many different dimensions, that we are much more powerful than we think we are. And I think the blessing for me is finding those people and those tribes along the route of, a really wonderful life. And so back in the late 90s, I was visiting a grandmother in Biddeford and Appledore just outside of it, and walking the beautiful Cornwall cliffs, etc., and visiting Tintagel, of course, and Merlin, etc. Has, from the time I was very young, and dragons. But I stayed at a B&B and I met Solara and Suntory, but we didn't even know it at that point. And we didn't know who we were. And then again, just, the magic of the universe reconnected. And there's a few other people here who have been on that journey since the late 90s and early 2000s and a little later that I've met. Fleur, I have some art here in Canada. Julia made me a cape at one point. I mean, it's just fabulous. And one of the things that for me, working in a variety of different organizations and systems, my work has always been about seeing powerfully the magnificence in others and help them to see it. When they see it, it staggers me. Like it's so breathtaking, it staggers me, and I almost cry. And of course, that means I have to overcome my environment and what might be right in front of me to say, okay, what's really going on. And that's a constant work. And so, the late 2000s, I answered a call to go to Wales, and there's a couple of others here that were with us, and Fleur and I think Pippa, Julia, I think you might have been there as well. And we literally were gathering at this gorgeous castle in Wales with Solara and Santari and the crew. And we actually, just to show you how things evolve, while we were there, we all got together and played and came up with the Genius game, which has been such an amazing, and of course, Solara just takes that and magnifies it and and runs with it. And it was such an amazing opportunity. We were just talking about it, to be around the sides and encourage each other to own different parts, whether it's the lake of laughter or these other things, and infuse energetically. So at one point, my life might have been a bit more spiritual, and evolved to being definitely still what we might term as spiritual, but much more energetic. And it's being present and being part of that, regardless of what is happening around us. And I would love to hear more from the other co-hosts.
Yeah, brilliant. Can I just say something about that genius game? Because when you think of trying to change the world, right? It can often feel kind of big and heavy. And that game, we brought big giant fabric squares with rainbows and dolphins and stuff on them. And we laid them out in this giant hall. And you'd go to the Lake of Laughter and then to the Pathway of Greatness and then to and you'd move up the squares. And we had people lining the sides who were calling forth your genius. It was the most fun thing. Like, and that began, as Judy just reminded me, that was in 2009. In 2012, I started the Genius Game book, and I did workshops around the world and literally took genius from a perception of prodigies to everybody has genius in them, and here's ways in which you can unleash that genius, which I think is a huge
And I
contribution to
reached
it.
out the moment I got back, and you and I, if you remember, purchased the URL, and we actually had a
Yeah.
website up where
Yeah.
people could go in and play the Genius game. It was so much fun.
Oh, yeah, I still have that. It's still up. Fun. So yeah, my point is it can be fun and inspiring and
Yes.
really fabulous to do stuff like that. So okay, thanks, Judy. Eliza, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you, Solara. I have known that I wanted to change the world probably my whole life, but very consciously also since the late 90s. And part of that was answering the call to go to seminary and become a minister. And I love what Judy just said about I used to call it spirituality, but now it's much more energetic. That just landed in me so deeply. In the early 2000s, I was following Barbara Marx Hubbard and that whole birth of a new humanity. And that got activated. It wasn't activated from her, but it was activated because it was in my being. And that's my whole work. And now we're calling it New Humanity now and birthing a new humanity. And but and it's all about people awakening to their own biggest, boldest, most brilliant becomingness and watching people get a glimmer of that and step into that is truly my greatest joy. And I do that in a variety of ways. And I said before we started, when we were just chatting, it's like my vision is so huge. And I feel like my impact is relatively small. And yet, in this half an hour that we've been chatting, and then opened the call about 15 minutes ago, uh, it's like, oh, wait a minute. I am doing exactly what I'm here to do. And some of you are on this call who have been impacted by that. And um, in my work, I work with primarily women, but not entirely. I've got small groups and I've got books and I've got the ministry aspects of ministry that I still do. And what I know to be true is there is more. And as soon as we become willing to go beyond what we believe is possible, the doorways open up, the infinite opens up. And that's my work, is to be that doorway and invite people to see something beyond their wildest beliefs at this moment. I met Solera probably about, I think it was about this time of year in 19 that I started playing with you. So five years maybe or so. And that for me, this work for me has just me so much permission to go beyond what I believed was possible inside the construct of my work as a unity minister. And every week we play, and every week we go further, and every week I'm inspired again and again and again. And so often somebody like Judy will just say something. It's like, that's what I've been feeling. I just didn't have the language for it. So my evolution from ministry then went into birth 2012, then went into frequencies and the quantum world, and now we're beyond quantum into new humanity. So I think I'll stop there for the moment. Oh, you're muted,
One of the things we were
Solara.
talking about before everybody came on the call was that it isn't about numbers. When one thinks one measures one impact by numbers, but actually it's about the field you walk as and operate as. So when you say yes to something bigger and greater and you're for it, you then become the field of that. And then, so even if you only work with one person, because you're working as a field, it ripples through the world. And then they ripple through the world, and it has a much greater impact. So we were playing with a little bit of that before we started the call as well. So yeah, brilliant. Thanks. Okay, Kelly, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly David, and I just recently left the United Nations after 25 years of working there in its humanitarian division. I was last the chief of strategy, which meant that I developed the strategy for the whole international humanitarian system, what we should be doing about the world's people in need in terms of saving lives and alleviating human suffering. But to get to the question, that's what I was just doing. Solera's question about when did I first know that I did want to make a difference in the world? Like some of the others who spoke, that was at a very young age. I think maybe the memory that I have most strongly of it is when I was 8 or 9 years old, watching an after-school documentary, because my mom only let us watch PBS, that was about the history of the Native Americans and the arrival of the settlers, us. And it was a documentary about what really happened versus what I had known up until that point as an 8 or 9 year old in elementary school. And I was profoundly devastated. I cried and sobbed, and my mom couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. But I very much remember having a profound feeling of like, hell no, not on my watch. Like I have to do something about this. So, having though been raised without any attention to my spiritual well-being, for lack of a better word, only to get ahead and get a good job and meet my material needs in the world. I pursued pretty traditional paths to how I was going to do that. But I always had a very strong truth-telling aspect to my personality, which was not much adored by my family, in particular my mother. But so I decided to go into journalism, and I worked in journalism for a very short time for newspapers like the Los Angeles Times, New York Newsday, some Midwestern dailies in the United States, before realizing that I was bored sitting in town hall meetings, and that was what I was covering as a young cub reporter, local politics and things, that I didn't want to just write about the problems. And I also very frequently was in those meetings thinking they didn't know what they were doing and I could do a better job at solving those problems. So one thing led to the other, and I very quickly transitioned into my work for the United Nations. And I spent 25 years there. And I was just saying in the intro to this call that it's hard to really think of doing anything innovative in that system because it is very Northern centric, very hierarchical, very political, very competitive internal culture. And high stakes, high pressure all the time on the types of issues we're dealing with, responding to Ukraine, the Middle East, et cetera. But in that place, long before I had any awareness of doing anything in the consciousness side, and long before I met Solera, I would say, because I've been pondering it as we've been talking, that two things that I did stand for, kind of not going against the grain of the internal culture, was working really hard to create a culture of collaboration within the organization and bring people together in ways that had never been done before. And actually, to this day, are still spoken of, in particular in the humanitarian division in the UN. And I think that carried through into all the work I did in the field as well, because it was not very rewarding to me, actually, to be coordinating the actual assistance to people in IDP camps or refugee settings, which is what my organization does. It was more of interest to me, the collaborations that I did with, for instance, non-Western governments for how they could participate in the humanitarian system. And I organized governments throughout Southern Africa to work more collaboratively around what we called the triple nexus of threats to human life in Southern Africa. And one of the most recent things, just before I left, I led an evaluation of the UN's humanitarian response in Yemen. And I'm not saying that the sides of both sides of the conflict, the government in power and the Houthis, were either side very good guys. But one thing they were was constantly maligned and misunderstood and unfairly represented in a lot of our talks and discussions in the UN about how to do things there. And I spent a great deal of my energy ensuring that the evaluation outcomes would not be watered down by senior management, which is exactly what they consistently tried to do, in line with my truth-telling aspect of my personality. And one of the most moving meetings I ever had was when we briefed both sides separately, the government authorities and the Houthis, on the findings of the evaluation, because some of them were moved to tears with the honesty of the report and how we openly talked about the failures and shortcomings of UN action, which they're not used to seeing acknowledged. And so that is kind of what I think was some of the things that were really important to me in that endeavor. But it eventually got to the point where I fully understood that inside that system, that very calcified old system that's all about protecting its own interest because it's only the sum of its parts, meaning member states and governments, that is not where any true transformation was going to happen. And around the time I started searching for something more and finally late in life, trying to connect to something bigger than myself, I came across Solera. I did do a 2-year stint where I converted to Islam and studied for 2 years in some of the top seminaries in the US for Islam, but also really quickly abandoned that endeavor as not the place where things were going to change, and really spent much more time than trying to find my way to living in a more conscious manner, and left the UN, lived in a cabin for 9 months, had a lot of, where I was deeply just reflecting and trying to find the way forward, had a lot of powerful experiences, one of which led me to move here to Wells alongside Solera, and am now applying myself to try to write about a new envisioned way to do humanitarianism in the world, to explore. I think of humanitarianism as just the human impulse to care for others, and in our world now to care for others globally. And I want to look at how that impulse to care has been expressed throughout, the ages, in institutions, through charity, through what we call the modern humanitarian system that has existed since 1991. What have been, the impacts, challenges of that, and what are the opportunities to re-envision something entirely different for the world?
Wow, beautiful. Hey, would you be okay if I brought up the Charlottesville thing?
Sure.
Because it's one of the things that I watched Kelly go through. So I don't know if it was what, 6 years ago that that happened. So in Charlottesville, someone drove a car or a truck into peaceful protesters, and Kelly was one of the people injured in that. And to watch her response to that afterwards was extraordinary. So she wrote this piece and it got published in who did it?
The Huff Post.
Yeah. Do you want to say something about that? Because I think that your reflections on that incident, being someone who was injured, was so powerful. I think that had a huge impact.
Well, I would think it was akin to what I remember so strongly from when I was a young girl. Just like, I cannot believe this is happening in our country. And it was almost profoundly more harming, the remarks that were made after by our now current president again. And I mean, I have to say, I did not feel very enraged at the perpetrators of all of that violence on Charlottesville. I felt more like this is just wholly symptomatic of,
Yeah.
the problem that we created. That we're part of the creation of that. That doesn't exist alone, that these people are attacking and are in that frame of mind.
Yeah.
And
It
I
was inspirational. I remember because I read the article when you put it out, and it was so reflective and thoughtful and inspiring from someone who had been in that position to see a different viewpoint coming forth from you. It was really, I was really touched by it at the time. So, yeah, just another example. So, yeah, brilliant. Thanks. That was wonderfully said. Thanks. Okay, Sheila, you're on.
Hi, my name is Sheila Richardson. I'm in the Northwest of the United States. Um, boy, I too knew at a very young age that I wanted to make a difference for people. I was about 7 years old. My grandmother was a major influence in my life, and she was a Christian Science practitioner, very powerful woman. And I was inspired by her. And um, the next time I was involved with a major situation, I was a student protester, and we ending the war at Vietnam. I held an office in the cabinet at the University of Washington. That was its purpose was to get people out of going to Vietnam, draft resistance, and I was majorly involved with that for 4 or so years. after I graduated, I kind of dropped out of politics and lived in a yoga commune for 2 years in Northern California. And then my big goal in life was to become enlightened, which is it kind of seems very silly to me at this point. Um, because after enlightenment, what? Chop wood and carry water. And and then I've evolved out of that into various versions of chop wood and carry water. I moved to Aspen, Colorado to ski and connected with my husband, who was starting a ski magazine, which became an international ski magazine that's still around, Powder Magazine. And I joined him with some resources that I had and sold advertising and just did whatever needed to be done. And that actually that's kind of been the theme of my life, is look around, see what needs to be done that I can do and do it. And that has always, I've felt connected to God in that way. And things have evolved. I built a PR firm in Seattle and helped a lot of the new startups get going in the whole internet. I was considered to be an internet pioneer. I worked with Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and some of those guys when they were real new. And we were all just kind of feeling our way. We thought the internet actually would be the end all be all of creating enlightenment in the world, actually, because we could all communicate with each other. And I think what we're doing today actually is a representative of the vision that I had in the early 90s. Yeah. And now I'm just retired from work in the world, and I love doing energy work with Solera. I reconnected with Solera a couple of years ago and have been following her work for many years, and just loving life and being. I'm really just about being, and being energy and love and being here. So glad that all of you guys are here in this place, and I'm just appreciative to be a part of this.
Yeah. Laura, one of the things I'm hearing is that nudges and following the nudges and being bold enough. I started my own business. I was a university professor, college professor, all of those different things. And being aware, so I had probably the two most diverse classrooms ever. And they asked me to teach computer networking. I was a computer networking engineer at one point. And so I said, okay, we'll do that. And so I'm looking at the syllabus and the book, and I'm looking at the next chapter. So I pull in my hardware guy and I say, okay, we need to talk about this because we're about to teach what happens in a computer in, your tabletop. And in those days, the language was you can have two drives, the master, which is the intelligent drive, and the slave drive. I just said, so I knew. So he said, Judy, I can't teach this. They're going to go crazy. I said, yeah, they are. So I'm here. And I sat right outside and I heard the rumblings as soon as he started teaching. So I walked in and they all knew. So we're having this great conversation. And I said, okay, now everybody here has an envelope because I did some digging. And so we, at that point, wrote to Microsoft, wrote to Bill Gates, wrote to everybody. We wrote to all the big hardware people and expressed our distress around this, etc. And we then, I had to let the college know, etc., in a number of different ways. So the next thing you know, I'm in Redmond, Washington. I'm at Microsoft having all of these different meetings. And the bigger thing was I asked the students to come with me and they were pretty overwhelmed. They didn't want to. I said, we'll fundraise whatever to get you there. And at one point, the college wasn't going to let me go. And this was really interesting. There was a person who was leaving the college. He approved it. He came to me at convocation and he said, I really think it's important. This is important what you're doing. So I'm going to approve it before it will be one of my last acts before I go. You just never know. They don't have to be huge acts. It can literally be going and having the conversations and they're now called primary and secondary.
Uh-huh.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yes.
Fantastic. Languages is huge, isn't it?
yes.
It's just like it has huge impact. So one of the things, so this painting behind me here, a friend of mine from Norway did a digital thing and it's called Earthians. And I came up with the name Earthians so that we could be a global collective instead of Americans and Canadians and Brits. And, like we could be Earthians all together, right? Like that language has the potential to unite us. So it's one of the things I play with is language, just like that. And bravo, Judy. That's fantastic. I love it. Yeah. And I was going to say, as I listened to you, it's about the impulses we have,
Mhm.
and it's following on those impulses, whatever they are, because they'll be unique to every one of us, those impulses. And I think when you follow the impulses, one of the things I've discovered in the last year and a half, anyways, there's so much joy and innovation in those inside those impulses. So you could talk yourself out of it. You get an impulse to do something, right? And you could go, "What, me, who, how, blah, ah," that's quite normal. But if you allow yourself to follow the impulse, it will open things for you that are extraordinary. So have any of you had examples like that of something that you followed that takes you into it? Sally, I noticed you were nodding your head. Do you want to say? You don't have to, Sally, but if you'd like to, go for it.
Thank you. Yes, it's very interesting. Until I sort of woke up and became much more conscious and deliberate about what I was doing, I noticed that a lot of my behaviors were very impulse driven. And very often I was I had a strong impulse that I shouldn't put my head above the parapet. I shouldn't show up. And it wasn't until my mum died when I was 41, and this was 20 years too early for her. And then I just got such an overwhelming impulse that I had to step up,
Mhm.
and it's changed my life. It's changed my family's life, and yeah, it's good. But my drive now is to be much more deliberate and much more with clearer focus and intention. I was
Yeah.
brought up, classic. I'm 73. You can't have what you want. I want doesn't get. So you were never allowed to decide what you wanted because there was no point. It took me years to get over that.
Wow, that's just brilliant. I love it. Yeah, it was the same for me. My dad died when I was 34, and it completely revolutionized my life. Completely like turned me around, spun me off in a whole different direction. Thanks, Dad. It was like, woo, I don't think I'd be who I am in the world today if it hadn't been for his going right when he did. It's like, woo, it's amazing how a group of us, some of us on this call, stick up your hands if you were one of the people who just put a chapter into Agents of the Epiphany. Yeah, a bunch of us. So, because we realize that a lot of what's happened to all of us is we've had epiphanies through our life. So even if you originally knew something like this, the system wasn't really designed to support it back then, because I'm 74 as well, Sally. I'm so, and it's like, it wasn't like that back then. You didn't stick your head up above the parapet, and in corporate, you tried to, do the best you could to look okay. But it was like when my dad died, I just went, whoa, here we go, world. I'm not wasting my time anymore. I'm going for it. I left. the corporate life, moved from Canada to the States, got married to a wonderful Black man in the United States, and had this amazing experience, and then divorced him, and then came to the UK and got married all over again and started a whole new life all over again. So it was like, woo, just big, massive epiphanies and leaps all the way along, which I think has really supported me.
It's exactly what Richard Rohr talks about in his book Falling Upwards, isn't it? You spend
Yeah.
the first of your life creating the container, and then something happens and you are literally turned upside down.
Yeah. Because one of the things I've really learned from my last 25 years on the planet has been that everything happens for a purpose. And often we get so embroiled in the what we feel like or how we've reacted to it that we're completely oblivious to that there's a purpose behind it. It seems like the universe is just throwing nonsense your way. But if you can sit in that and look for the purpose, even if it's not readily available in that very moment, to me now I see that everything that happens to me is the universe pointing me to the next iteration of my leadership in the world. And when you see it from there, it moves it so much more graciously into that space where you can take the next iteration. So Kelly and I just had some great conversations last week on all kinds of topics. And it opened the door for me to write the next book I'm writing, which is called Redesigning the Future of Global Civilization. Which some of my girlfriends are like, holy jumping, like, what are you writing? Like, but it's what I've been at work on with many of these people for the last 20 years. So it's time to put it down in a practical way in a book. And so I'm in the process of doing that now. So that's
And
exciting.
others of your girlfriends are saying, yes, keep going, keep going. I wanted to just speak to the impulse. I have also always followed the impulse, regardless of the logic of it, and especially when it didn't make logical sense from a fairly young age, probably in my 20s at least. But that, excuse me, but that impulse is it comes from a place where I don't have to think about it. I don't have to talk myself into it. Some of the feedback that I got, especially in my younger years, was you're so brave or you're so things like that, so courageous. I'm like, really? I'm just doing what is mine to do and just following through on that. And so the impulses now are so much a part of really just even minor decisions. It's like, what's the impulse? Oh, this way. Oh, this way. Oh, this way.
Yeah.
So I just want to put that frame that in a really accessible way for people as well.
I'll bring up again this
And by
piece
the
about,
way,
yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say, again, so much of what we do in the groups that we are in together, the collectives that we've got in the different um, makeup of the people who are on this call is like somebody will say something, whether they're even conscious of what they're saying or not. And then, at least for me, but I think other people, it's like, oh, yeah, that's so true. It's like, it magnifies it to hear somebody else put words on something you may have been considering, or maybe not even quite consciously considering, but know to be true.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I'm just writing in this book that I was just telling you about is that often most of the things that I think are tried to be done in the world to make it better are very practical orientation, around can we plant more trees? Can we, for the environment, can we pass laws? Can we do, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that I'm really conversant in is what I call the invisible realm. It's the quantum field of possibilities. It's the quantum entanglement of us all. It's the where does genius come from? Where does those are invisible things. And yet, when I start to play with others in those invisible realms, it's like everything lines up behind me to help make it so and give it impact in the world. Even if only, let's say, 50 people ever bought the book, let's say, that's irrelevant to me. It's not about the numbers that read the book. It's that you're placing something in conscious awareness, giving it language and form out of the invisible realms, and that then ripples through everything so that people start to have more awareness of that and grow into it and start to operate in it. So one of the things I did in the probably it was around 2008 maybe, I started to talk about emotion as potential rising because at the time it was all emotion as reaction. And I did videos on it and I did an online course for it and stuff like that. So very few people have probably ever seen it. But today, how many people talk about emotion as potential rising? Like it's a very well-known concept. So it didn't matter to me how many people related to the specifics of what I did. It went out. It forms as an idea out there in consciousness and the right people with the right genius pick it up and do the next thing and it ripples around. So you can't measure the success of you making a difference in the world by numbers. Again, I'll say that. It's kind of like we measure it by the living of our lives and the creation that we bring to the living of our lives in every way in which we touch it is kind of how I feel about it. So, yeah.
I love the idea of numbers, and I know we've all chatted about that. I love when Eliza said earlier, I think it was you, Eliza, not on my watch. I've said that so many times in my lifetime, and I'm now a grandmother, and there already is, and there will be a different world. But in my work in organizations, starting my own business, and now I'm working a lot with small business, I just get so tired. Like in Canada, 4% of venture capital goes to women-owned businesses. It's done. So I then discovered this person in Toronto and we met and started what was then called SheEO. And she has done a great job. And I just said, okay, I can seed that in Atlantic Canada. It's a whole new economic model where women mostly would donate. It wasn't even at that point true venture capital. And it would come together, and then the women would come together in a room. We would all choose, doesn't matter where you came from in life, didn't matter if you were a banker or whatever, whoever put in chose. And so we would choose like the top 6 or 7 businesses. They would go in a room, collaboratively decide how they would distribute the funds based on a good sense of what they wanted to do in their businesses. And it was interesting because reporters would say, "Oh, is that the war room?" It's like, no. This is about lift, and it's still going and expanding to several different countries today. And all of a sudden, no matter where you look, there are women's venture capital and where they'll invest in anybody, but primarily they're looking to invest in women-owned businesses, and so many women and young women who their businesses are about making changes in the world and a different way of doing business. So many of our businesses will use for their product or for their packaging, agencies that bring adults with mental and physical disabilities together. And so they're, that whole kind of social economy. And I think it's absolutely fabulous.
Wow. That's brilliant. Because Eliza wrote a book called Shiro, didn't you, Eliza?
I
Love
did.
it.
It's actually called Shiro's Journey, and it's a spiritual adventure written as a novelish. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I heard you say Shio, Shiro. Anyway, there's lots of variations of
Well,
that.
it was CEO, and they have renamed themselves to Coralus because of, us in terms of collaboration. But when you look up the definition of what coral does to an ocean, so in the ocean of humanity working, it's
Oh,
beautiful. Yeah.
oh, I love
Oh,
language.
very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
when it's used beautifully like that. I just love it. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. So anybody listening, you got any questions you want to put to us or anything you want to introduce into the conversation? Yeah, and Peggy.
Um, you started to introduce yourself, what you're doing, and are you a group that you want question from us?
Yeah, sure. Go for it if you want to.
But I'm studying and I try to multitask some because now I'm finished. But who who is the group? Who
Oh,
what?
so Judy, Sheila, Kelly, and Eliza and me are the panel for this.
Okay,
Yeah, so they all introduced themselves when we started, and we're each
okay.
talking. So we're just having an open conversation on because what I really want to do through this, I think that women in general are so easily collaborative and so inventive and kind of so bold and willing. I find many of us, anyways, are like that. So we come up with different ways of looking at how things can be done. And I think it's a it's not about for me, it's not about trying to fix stuff or improve on what is. For me, I'm about let's reinvent the design from which we originate everything, from which we live our lives, because that reinvention. So I posted in the event page today and on my timeline as well, from the book I'm writing, about 16, 17 things that I think if we reinvented these things, like genius, like conscious awareness, like connection, like there's a whole list of them. They go on and on. But then and so I'm going to write a chapter on each one as to how we can live into that redesign of us to be a spectacular species, and not just as humans, but as creatures, beings who live on Earth together and in the way in which we live on Earth together. So I'm really up for kind of what underpins the foundation of the redesign is what fascinates me and what each of us brings to that. So Anne Peggy, for example, is really passionate at the moment about a new kind of way of looking at our relationship with God, source, creator, universe. Yeah, is that how you'd say it? Yeah. So she's recording me in a podcast. Is it tomorrow we're doing that? About where
Yep.
we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
What's a new way of being in a relationship? And I remember years ago, someone, can't even remember who it was, and someone said to me, I am a child of my own belief. And I thought, oh, I really like that. Like, I don't have to follow mainstream beliefs. I can invent my own relationship to what I believe, what works for me. And I don't have to fight that with anybody else. I have my own experience, and that's right for me. And I thought, what a beautiful way to say it. I am a child of my own belief. If everybody was like that, it would be a very different world, you know? So, yeah. Sally,
Yeah.
were you going to say something? I know
Can
you would.
I just add to that? Because I love what you said. And I think that what I see, and I'm sure others of you have seen this, is that, as you go through life, you're imaginative, unless you're living in a paradigm of being very imaginative, i.e., artistic or a writer or something, it gets knocked out of us.
Yeah.
Very early on, even in our education systems, it gets knocked out of us. Everything is digital, everything is black and white, everything is scientific and factual, and we forget to play.
Yeah.
And I think that if as older women we can start to show that play is so creative and such fun, and but also extraordinarily expansive. Uh, I mean, just spreading that must be
Yeah.
amazing.
Just that, even the word, like Solara said, language, lighthearted. And I love what you said and normalizing the fact that we all here have thousands of years of programming. We know that the cells of me were alive in my grandmother. Well, it was against the law for my grandmother to become a doctor.
Ah,
So she served as a British nurse and served I mean, it was just her story is absolutely phenomenal. Then went to South America. So I was just blessed to have time with my South American great grandmother, my abuela Maria, who taught me to go to the hills and call the wind, all of these different things, because that's what she did. She was a shaman. And so I I love the idea of play. I love the idea of programming. I love when I'm with a group and I stop and say something, then it's up, oh, wait a minute. That was programming. Let me come at it from this side. And everybody goes, what? Tell me more. It's amazing. And even just to say that our minds have been programmed. And we were talking early about that nourishment, to what truly nourishes everybody. There's so much about food, etc. Well, what am I doing with my mind and my heart and on a daily basis? What am I feeding it? Yeah,
yeah.
it's,
And could we use words instead of using retired? I never use the word retired because it has tired in it. But perhaps replay. I'm,
But,
I'm
and even redefining, and I know Solara and I've talked about this many times, and she's great for it, but we've been programmed to believe in decline.
yes.
No. If I had lived in a world that didn't tell me I'd need these by the time I was 40, would I need them now? And I'm
Yeah.
constantly playing with that energetically, that doesn't have to be declining.
Yeah. What's
'Cause I
interesting is
join you next year, I turn 70, so I'll be joining you in that.
it's great. So one of the things that's coming up for me as you're talking is what allows us to be emboldened in our creative inventiveness. Uh, and I think for me, it was a series of epiphanies and a move of countries 3 times helped. I know not everybody's going to do that, but I was raised very normal in Canada and then went to the States and was married there for a while and now live in the UK. And I live near Glastonbury, which is Avalon in the UK. So it's a purely magical place that I live in. The energy is amazing. The people are kind and wonderful. It's a whole different way of living. But it's not that I'm um, living in a bubble. It's not that. Uh, it's I think what enlivened my inventiveness was that impulse to make the world better. Like it became the raison d'etre for my whole life. And it happened somewhere in the late 1990s. And I can't even pick a moment where it really happened. I would say everything I am about is about making the world better and brighter and more awesome and more evolved than it's ever been before. And I have found that path to be extremely joyful, extremely fun, the best people. Just meet the best people. You they do the most amazing things together. And you have so much fun. It's incredible. So I would ask some of the panel and anybody else who wants to say, like, what was it for you that emboldened you in that? Yeah, Liza.
I think for me, it was um, my continual awakening. But there's so much power, and I get so much out of being with groups of women who are willing to go beyond what they believe is possible. And to the play idea, the play and laughter have become such high values to me. Like relatively recently, I can tend to be a little bit like, we have to do this work. And that's that when I'm by myself, I tend to go a little bit more serious. But when we join together
Mm.
and the work that several of us do here is we just line up into what's possible. And that brings so much joy, as does the qualities that I'm consciously activating often is innocence and curiosity and laughter and just like feeling the density of whatever the world is and just transcending that.
Yeah.
and so my point in all of this is to be around women who are doing that,
Yeah.
to be around people who are continually playing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Kelly, did you stick up your hand for that?
I
Yes,
did.
yes, but I'm not sure what I was going to say, but I'll try to say something. I don't even remember what the question was, but I think it was what shifted things for you.
Yeah.
And for me, it was the realization that, and it has something to do with what you have already said about focusing on what is, that it is impossible, absolutely impossible to change anything by focusing on what is. And it was Albert Einstein that said you cannot solve the problems from within the paradigm that created it in the first place.
Yeah.
And then that for me became pretty clear. I mean, I knew within sight of a few months of joining the UN some of the enormous challenges of making change, and not even things that are inherently about the people in the system. It is just that you are trying to do, address incredibly challenging, complex political problems without the commiserate support and willingness of world leaders. And it's a very complex situation. But even though I knew that, I stayed in it, believing that, of course, all these good people working in it who want to change it, we are going to do that. And I led numerous reforms and, have been involved in many, many rethinkings of how we can do better as the United Nations. But the problem is we're always focusing on what is and trying to make what is work better rather than get outside of that and into a whole new paradigm and make a whole new world. We assume that we have to be working within governments, and that is just a given. And everybody knows the problems of that. Well, why can't we have a non-government form of global collaboration amongst people? Why do we need governments, actually?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
these are the kind of things that shifted for me when I realized, I'm not very bright apparently, because it took me years and years of reform after reform after reform to
Well,
realize.
when you delve into that statement more, Kelly, around Einstein, he was also saying that
Mhm.
it has to be recreated in consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
well,
can't
this
be
is
created matter to matter. It can't be. It has to be created in consciousness. So the more of us, when we can dance or be quiet or, whatever we do to connect to that consciousness, I know for me, it's connecting to the divine and the divine in everybody. There
yeah.
has to be a mind much bigger than mine. And for me, that's God consciousness, the divine. And the more we can hang out there, I think that's where these impulses come.
Yes.
Nice.
And
Holy
Kelly, you're programmed like the rest of us. You've just been working your way through the programs.
me. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, I know.
Lynn, you stuck up your hand. You want to say?
Yeah, because I'm sort of nodding to all of you, but at the same time, I'm realizing that for me, my path has been much more inward about really just reprogramming from the inside and out rather than being out there. Yes, of course, I've tried within the systems, but that just I became a rabbi and I thought I was going to change things in Norway. Of course, it never happened. And it's sort of like one thing has led to another. And basically what you've all been saying, it has to come from the inside out, from my programming being transformed. And from that, I can see enormous changes. Just, every single moment can be fun rather than it has to be something I'm looking forward to ahead, putting it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is the place you live from and the field that creates.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be just a personal field. I live in a massive, expansive field of, I don't know what anymore. I don't think I could define it. And
Yeah.
when you shift from being a person with an energy field to being a field
Yeah.
of, we shall remake the world together in
Yeah.
brilliant and fun and exhilarating ways, exciting, then I find that the inspiration is given to me. whether that's from God Source Creator Universe, whether that's from my friends, whether that's from watching a television show or watching Taylor Swift on stage. Like I'm inspired. I'm constantly aware of looking for the inspiration to move towards greatness. Not personal greatness, but greatness for the world. And I use everything as inspirations for that. So yeah. Anybody else want to share on that for you? Yeah, Jules, go for it.
I wonder, I'd like to ask the panel, do you think it's any kind of coincidence that the panel is mostly made out of older women?
Well, I would say
Oh,
I
no.
hand selected them, but I didn't notice age. And actually, Kelly's 20 years younger than me, and I'm not sure Liza's about the same. So we,
Probably in the middle of you and Yelly.
yeah, so we're not all in the 70s. So Kelly's in her 50s, and what are you, Eliza?
63.
Yeah,
You
63.
know, it's interesting because when I don't feel
Yeah,
when I was younger, I don't feel what I perceived as my current age. I lift weights, I run around with my grandson physically, mentally. I get surprised sometime when I look in the mirror because I've decided, to embrace the silver in terms of my hair, etc. And I'll look and I'll say, oh, I look more like my mother now. And as I remembered her, but I think there's I can remember several years ago now, I have a golden retriever, and we were at this event where there was all these providers, and Jake went over to the pet therapy tables. So I went over, but I said to myself, I'll do it when I retire, which of course my sons laughed at because they said, you're never retiring. I said, no, you're
yeah,
right, I'm not. But we started a path. They needed people. We work in senior centers. We work in hospitals. He does hospice work, and I completely surrender to him when we're doing it. And we go in, and he climbs up on a bed with somebody dying and is like a death doula. I mean, it's amazing, amazing work. And I think all nature is also constant. I know it is a truth of mine that all nature is constantly collaborating for that sense of nourishment that helps us be more
yeah,
bold and grand.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
The facts of the older woman, I'd love to reframe, call it the wiser of the divine feminine.
yeah. Well, it's interesting for me because when I turned 70, I said it was the new 17, and that's kind of how I feel. It's the, is that I'm full of life, vitality, well-being, and we were on one of, I call it our group, the Murmuration of Maestros. So we do consciousness innovation work together, and we were on it last week, and we were talking about that I've known most of them for 20 years, but none of us, not a one of us looks any older than 20 years ago. And these are years where you would expect to look from 50 to 70. You would expect to look much older, but none of us do. And
Yeah.
so there's something about living in a vital state with a belief that contravenes normal belief that allows you to live different. And so many people now are living past 100 that they're breaking that belief for us. So there's dancers in Australia that are 109, and there's weightlifters at 93, and people breaking the thought beliefs around aging and what's possible with that. So that's just another example of how we do
For
it.
me,
So
that's an excellent example of what um, someone else said earlier around connecting to that higher place, but bringing that wisdom down and applying it in the real world.
yeah,
As you've explained, Kelly and Judith, Sheila and Eliza and Solera, about all the wonderful things you've done in the world,
yeah,
you can actually see what the real world problems were.
yeah,
And now you've stepped into that amazing, almost super conscious place
yeah,
where you can actually say, well, actually, maybe I can receive that higher wisdom from somewhere that actually does move those mountains,
yeah.
that the places where you were in were not able to be shifted so well.
Do you know Jules is an alchemist, right? as am I now, as a good number of us. And an alchemist could sit at home in their chair or in their garden and remake the world. And it's that to me is quite revelatory
It
that that
is,
is a
yeah. But it's not
possibility.
as easy for the application for me, which is amazing to be with all you amazing people who've come from the application place. Now you're going into the magic, and then you can go. So to me, it's root to crown, back to root.
Yeah.
It's natural.
You,
It's
you
a
know,
natural spiral.
well, one of the things, Jules, that you're bringing up for me is something that we talk about a lot, and I feel like we used to have to reach for that super consciousness out, but the
Yeah.
gap has closed. It's like it's right here.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
simple, oh wait, am I in my sort of mundane, or am I in my magical? Am I in my outer reality, or in my truth? And it's just like,
Boom. There you go.
Yeah.
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 yeah,
Look, like reaching into a wardrobe for a blouse.
Yeah. So let me
yeah.
talk about intelligence for a second, because this is one of the things that the group that I host and work with, um, I would say we don't operate just with brain intelligence anymore. We've connected ourselves with a greater intelligence, a greater creative intelligence, be that the universe or the earth or nature or, there are many sensory intelligence. There's so many versions of intelligence beyond the brain memory approach. And I would say that I now live more primarily in a greater version of intelligence. And that is rippling through the world, and a lot of people are now doing that. So a practical example of that would be, um, let's say, you know how you would feel like you're done with something, but you don't know what to do next. Like a big completion phase is happening for your bigger work in the world, but you don't know where to go next.
Mhm.
Well, I don't just wait. I go get it because it's there waiting for me wherever it comes from. So I go get it and let it flow through me and begin. So I'll leap from one thing to another with very seldom big gaps in between, although occasionally I might have a nice break for something. But that intelligence is now showing up in new children being born. You can see it in the new kids, right? You see it in their eyes. They're like old souls. They're like very, very different, these children today. I've just been watching this video of a kid called Max Alexander. He's a fashion designer since he was 4 years old. He's now 8 years old, and he's done clothes for all the celebrities. He's been on the big catwalks, and he's so full of joy and invention. And he's creating clothes that are so different. And I kind of think, we prepped that. He can be that because we prepped the way for these kids to be born like that. We didn't just follow along the normal route of, brain intelligence kind of thing. So, it's fun to be able to see those things and witness it in the world. So, yeah. Anybody else? Anything you want to add or ask? Yeah, Deborah,
Um,
go for it. 2 seconds. I'll get Deborah to say first.
yeah, I mean, I'm loving this conversation. And, when we're looking at aging, I think we're in this timeless age now where we're actually reversing. It's this timelessness, and it's so exciting. When I look at photos of me in my 40s, I look a lot older than I do now in like 63. And I just love every single year that passes by because it brings more wisdom, it
Yeah.
brings more playfulness, more joy, more being, and playing in that quantum multidimensional field, which when we're younger, we don't appreciate who and what we are. And I think part of the reason, maybe for the reversing of the age, is the more awareness of what we're putting into our body and treating our body as our temple, but also appreciating that everything has a consciousness and you can interact with that consciousness,
Yeah.
like you can interact with the consciousness of water and instruct it what to do in the body. But, when we talk to younger people about this, some of them get it straight away because they're so switched on, but others think you're absolutely mad and like, what's she on? So it's just really good fun playing in this field, and yeah, it's just brilliant.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? You reminded me about Veda Austin, who does the work with the intelligence of water, which is mind-blowing. Like, I went and saw her in Glastonbury last year, and what she's doing, it has a ripple effect. It's not just, oh, water has intelligence. It's like, oh my God, if water has intelligence, everything has intelligence. And that is a kind of going back to what a lot of the probably native indigenous peoples believed in the first place, that we need to be connected in some way with all of that. So, yeah, somebody's cooking.
Lynn, du må mute deg.
I think that's Lynn.
Yeah, hang on while I just mute her. Oops,
Yeah.
just a sec there. Okay, I've muted her. So there you go. Yeah, I think it's Lynn too. So, yeah. So Sheila, you were going to say something.
Only that you reminded me of, articulating things and then that going out into the world and making a difference. And, when we articulated what you give your attention to increases, that was a while ago, and you were real involved with some of that a while ago, and now people know that people, that's starting to be a normal conversation in the world, and that notion itself is so empowering for all of us. And it's it's just really cool that that's out there and changing and allowing and creating. We can create more love and joy, and just by what we give our attention to.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Kelly?
I wanted you to say more about it than I possibly could, but another thing that, because one of the questions Solera talked to us about asking ourselves is, and sharing something we've done that's innovative. And honestly, I think the most innovative thing I've done is start trying to work in consciousness, actually. But one of the products of that, which I truly do believe, is that we have, not just me, but I think I did do a lot of it, I think, is elevate the consciousness of dogdom.
Yes.
Working in the 9 months that I was, on my own in this cabin, I really did a lot of work with Solera's help to talk to my dog. And at this point, I feel like Solera, myself, my roommate, can all easily have a well, maybe not Solera the easiest. Sometimes Denise and I work harder at it, but we can more or less directly communicate with my dog about what she wants, what she needs, and even she talks to us about bigger things than we would think were on a dog's mind.
Yeah.
And I genuinely believe that's happening.
Yeah.
And that it's a big shift, and that she represents that for not just herself, but
Yeah.
animal kingdom.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I suppose I'm
And
going
the
to have to
trees.
start to
And
wrap
the
us up.
trees.
And the
Yeah.
Oh, and the trees, yes. Yeah, exactly. So what I'd ask the five of us is, if you were going to say one thing to people that's like, ta-da, here, try this, to embolden them, to get them to take the next levels of creation and play and innovation, what would that be? So if I was looking at it myself, I would say, find a tribe of creators. I think that's hugely important, to have other people that you resonate with who are up to similar kinds of things, who at the very least, that empower you and inspire you to go for greatness. I would say that's probably my number one tip is that. So, Judy, how about for you?
I think that the tribe, for all kinds of reasons, I believe it's all there all the time. I don't even think we have to reach for it. So it's know deeply that you are more powerful than we've been taught to believe. And start from there. You know, you start with that question. If I was more powerful, boom. Yeah, that's it for me.
Brilliant. I love it. Eliza?
Very similar. Believe that you are so much more than you believe, and yourself surrounded on a regular basis with women. I mean, men too, but with women who see it in you, who can call it forth in you, because it starts with a glimmer of an impulse. And that impulse can be, I want more, I see more. It can be, I'm, distraught in what's going on in my world. And there's more. There's so much more.
Yeah,
So
beautiful.
that collective is so vital, especially for us as women.
Yeah. Super. Thanks. Kelly?
Well, I don't want to, I was going to say something very similar, which was believe, 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 because every time I let my logical mind take over and stop talking myself out of everything is when I'm down the rabbit hole, down the rabbit hole. So just, hold fast to the belief, but that's what others have said. So I will also add that with or without belief, things started to change for me when I just took the leap of faith and just said yes. Said, I don't know what it is. I don't know how it's going to happen. This Solera woman is crazy, but I will just say yes. I'm up for it. Let's do it. And then the things just started happening that were not me. They were other things impacting on me from the divine. So it was simply the taking the leap to say yes.
Yeah.
That
That
really
yes
switched.
opens all kinds of doors for you. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sheila, go for it.
It's what gives you joy, what gives me joy, and putting my attention on that. Takes me on wonderful, wonderful journeys and always has. Um, I can be like Eliza talked about, I can be terribly serious and organized and all of that. So it's the whole thing about really what gives me joy. And let me tell you, hanging out with Solera and hanging out with you guys gives me joy.
Same
And
here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what I can bring through then.
Oh, fantastic. But look, before we go, oh, I love that, Sally. Before we go, let's all just line up together for whatever your yes is to whatever it is for, and for the world to be brighter and better because all of us are in it. Okay? Here we go. Okay. Oh my God, that felt so good. This has been fabulous. I have loved this conversation with you all. I will be putting the recording up on the event page, as well as on my timeline, as well as I have a podcast that's called Outrageously Evolving, so it'll go in there too. So exciting. I love it. And yes, we're all doing reactions because I finally upgraded my thing and I can do it too now. There we go. Wonderful. Thank you for being who you are in the world. Thank you for joining us in this amazing conversation and go forth and be brilliant in the world and make it brighter and better in every way you can. So, lots of love, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.